This is Get Real with Deb Waterbury, a show where Dr. Deb gets real as she teaches through books and studies on topics relevant for today. And now, here is your host, Dr. Deb Waterbury.
Well, hi. We are in week 11 of Tired of Standing. We are on the home stretch. We got this week and then next week, and we will have gone through the entire book exponentially. So if anybody ever asked you if you did an exponential study, you could say you did, because this is verse by verse, and we've covered every single one. And you know, I'm leaving the last, and I think Peter did as well, in terms of, again, we know 1 Peter has been about teaching us to refocus ourselves on what is most important as we live in this world, keeping our minds centered on Christ, centered on eternity, no matter what's happening around us right now. And again, he's speaking to these churches in Asia Minor and these Christians who are going through a lot of persecution, especially by the people around them that they used to be a part of, and now they're not. So it really is applicable for us. But the last chapter here, chapter 5, is where we're going to cover this week and then next week. He's talking about church. And he's talking about not necessarily, the church building, because the building's not the church. It's the people. You're the church. The people in the church, that's the church. The church is the group of God's people. So he does this in a couple of sections, and he's really, so that's how I'm going to divide the last 2 weeks. He talks to us first about what it looks like when a church is healthy, what the leadership looks like, what we should be looking for in a healthy church, how we should be a part of a healthy church. And then the last section, before he leaves off, he talks about what it means to be a strong church. What does a strong church look like? And I think these are so valuable, and it's such a valuable place to end this study of 1 Peter. Because at the end of the day, you are going to find your strength, and you're going to find your purpose, and you're going to find your ability to do these things, obviously first and foremost from Christ, but you're going to find it then as a secondary lifting up of what you've learned from fellow believers. That's why the writer of Hebrews says, do not forsake the assembly of the saints. It is not about being a law, you have to go to church. I was growing in the Bible Belt. I grew up there, and it was like, if you didn't go to church, then you were going to hell in a handbasket. It's not about going because it's a rule. It's going because that's where you will be undergirded to do these things. This is where the strength, the accountability, the ability to do these things comes from surrounding yourselves by like-minded people, being equally yoked to those you're hanging out with. So you have to know what that looks like. You can't just go any old place. I'm telling you, there are so many, and Jesus was clear about this. There's going to be a lot of false teachers out there as it comes toward the end. There's going to be a lot of people that might belong to what they think is church, and they might belong to a group of believers that say they're speaking the truth. You've got to be aware of what that looks like. What does a healthy church, and I don't mean the building, what does a healthy group of Christ followers, people who say they're Christ followers, what does that look like? And so I wanted to spend a bit of time talking about that today. I think Peter did as well, in terms, because there's a whole, and this is not about church hopping. There's a lot of hopping from church to church. This one made me upset. This one didn't do what I needed it to do, whatever. We have to figure out what is it that we're looking for. The difference between church hopping and church shopping. You need to find the church that feeds you and feeds you the word, and looks like what Peter and the rest of the Bible describes as a strong church. But hopping around from church to church because you get your feelings hurt is not good behavior. And it's certainly not going to help you find what you're looking for, because guess who you're basing your church shopping on when you're doing church hopping? You're basing everything on you and how you feel, and whether not everybody made you happy. You got to remember, what's the point of church? The point of church is not you. The point of church is to give God glory. It's about glorifying God, worshiping God, enriching and enabling you to do the same thing in the world. So I think then we're going to look at verses 1 through 7 of chapter 5. And I want to, just a word, and this popped in my head, I want to say this. If you are in a situation right now and you're at a good Bible-believing, Bible-teaching church, and you've gotten your feelings hurt, stick with it. Because you're going to go to another church, and guess what? You're going to get your feelings hurt. Because church is people, and people make up church, therefore it will never be perfect. The stipulations is what I want to go through in terms of a strong church that you look for, not whether or not somebody hurt your feelings. So please don't let that be the reason why you leave a church. Okay, so again, as I said, two different parts here. This time I want to talk about the strong church, the healthy church. Next time we'll talk about the strong church. So let's begin by reading chapter 5, verses 1 through 7 together. And then I'll break that down and we'll talk about what that strong church, that healthy church looks like. Chapter 5, verses 1 through 7. Again, I'm reading from the English Standard Version. So I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and as a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is to be revealed. Shepherd the flock that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. Likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another, for God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your cares on him, because he cares for you. Okay, so, as I'm launching into my main point here, there's a lot of controversy out there about what he's actually talking about here. I want to enter into this in terms of what I believe. I believe Peter is, because you have to take the whole thing in context. Again, no chapter and verse distinctions when Peter wrote this letter. So he had just talked about suffering as a Christian, loving one another, making sure you get your strength and your direction from the right place. And so now he's moving into, leaders of this group, this is where I think how you need to behave, understanding that we all lead something. You might lead your children. You might lead a small group. You might, lead the church, whatever. You might be the women's minister, men's minister, whatever. Everybody leads in some way. And so even though I do believe that Peter is specifically speaking to those that are in charge of the church itself within Asia Minor, these principles will speak to all of us as we lead within the body of believers. So, now, at this very beginning part, however, he is speaking to shepherds. And when he speaks to the shepherds, he's speaking, his specific direction is to the elders, the pastors in your church. Now, it's important for you to know this because as you are looking for a church and trying to figure out where your church home would be, these are really wonderful things that you should keep in mind about what the pastor, what the elders should look like, what their job is. However, it's also important that you keep in mind this is the way you are to behave with those that you lead. If it's your children, no matter who it is, you're shepherding them. So there's some basic principles that Peter outlines here that can be used on both sides. So again, verses 1 through 2, the first part of 2 say, So I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed, shepherd the flock of God that is among you. Now, Peter wrote this to Christians in a culture that would have been really familiar with the lifestyle of a shepherd. They lived in an agricultural community, so it was all about shepherding sheep, goats, whatever. So there were a lot of shepherds around. This analogy he uses would have been really familiar to them. Not so much to us today, what a shepherd and what that means, what he was actually saying. So I thought it would be helpful for us to look at some characteristics of the shepherd that then would have translated easily to Peter's time, but maybe not so much to us, just to give us a little help here. Some things about the shepherd. Okay, so first thing, shepherds rescue their lost sheep. Now, sheep they're beautiful, they're gentle, they're humble, and you know what? Contrary to popular opinion, they're not dumb. They're actually smart animals. There are a couple things about their character that make us say that they're dumb, but they're not. They're smart animals. They're just gentle, very humble. But unlike other animals, they have no sense of direction. So I'm like a sheep probably. So yeah, I have no sense of direction, and they don't have any instinct for finding their way somewhere. So you can't tell point a sheep and say, go over there and it'll know where to go. And if it gets off track, it has no instinct to find out where back to go. Sheep just don't have that. So the shepherd's job was to rescue them when they go off track, because they were going to do that because they couldn't find their way back. It was just an instinct that was left out of them. Remember when Jesus says the spiritually disoriented, the confused, and they were lost, he was speaking to this crowd. He likened them to sheep without a shepherd, because they've been led astray. They were spiritually confused. He said in Matthew chapter 9, verse 36, this is Jesus. It says, when he saw the crowds, and he's not saying this is about him, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Isaiah describes lost men as sheep. In Isaiah chapter 53, verse 6, Isaiah said, all we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way. So lost people, like lost sheep, they need a shepherd that will lead them safely back into the fold. So that's one job of a shepherd. Another job of a shepherd that, again, the contemporary audience of Peter would have been familiar with this, is that they lead their sheep. Now, sheep are innately followers. They're going to, and that means they're very easily led astray. In New Zealand, about 40 million sheep are led to slaughter every year in the country of New Zealand. So what they do is they use this specially trained, castrated male, that sheep, and they call that sheep the Judas sheep. And the job of that Judas sheep is that it will lead the rest of the unwitting sheep into the slaughtering house. So they, unaware of what's happening, the sheep blindly follow the Judas sheep into their deaths. You know, that analogy works in all kinds of ways, especially for us. We will often be led astray by false teachers, and we're being led straight to our deaths. So sadly, you know, there are lots of, and Jesus said the end times is going to happen, going to be a lot of false shepherds. God pronounced judgment against these sorts of people who are leading people astray this way, these Judas sheep, or these people who are leading them. In Jeremiah chapter 23, verses 1 through 2, this is the prophecy. Woe to the shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture, declares the Lord. Therefore, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, concerning the shepherds who care for my people, you have scattered my flock and have driven them away, and you have not attended to them. Behold, I will attend to you for your evil deeds. So that's the part of a real shepherd, one that cares for his sheep, will lead his sheep to not their death, or lead them to life. And the third thing that a shepherd does is he takes care of their sheep. You know, sheep spend most of their time eating and drinking, but they're pretty indiscriminate about what they consume. So a shepherd has to be careful that they're eating the right kinds of food and drinking the right kind of water. Otherwise, they'll just eat and drink whatever's in front of them. We also think, you know, we often think of sheep as being like white and soft and cuddly and whatever. And lambs are, but the older the sheep gets, they're almost never white. They're usually very dirty because they have a lot of lanolin in their wool, and that lanolin attracts everything, so everything sticks to them. So the only way they ever get clean is if they're shorn, when the shepherd shears them. So because they have no capacity to clean themselves, the shepherd's job is to take care of them. So in the body of believers, a shepherd needs to take care of his flock, needs to take care of the sheep, guarding them, teaching them, helping them to remain clean, helping them to get clean when they get dirty, that sort of thing. That's a shepherd's job. And then finally, a shepherd's job is to protect their sheep. You know, sheep are almost entirely defenseless. They can't kick, they can't scratch, they don't bite, they don't run. They're just, you know, they're sitting ducks, man. That's why they're so love sheep, because they just stand there. There's nothing they can do. So, and you know, a full-wooled sheep, and what that means is a sheep who's literally ready to be shorn. When that sheep is standing, if it falls over on its back, it most often can't get back up because it's just so wobbly. There's so much wool there. It has to have a shepherd help it to stand back up when it falls. Gosh, do you see the analogies here? That's what a shepherd does. When we fall and we have the inability to get up, a shepherd helps us to stand. And then finally, shepherds comfort their sheep. Now, sheep, as I said, they lack a self-preservation instinct. They don't have that. And because they're so humble, and sheep really are, they're sweet animals, very humble, very meek. If you mistreat them, believe it or not, you can really hurt a sheep's feelings. And it will just give up. Like, they will die. They will roll over and die because you treat. And so shepherds have to know which of their sheep, like their personalities, because if they're really mean to a sheep, all sheep are really sensitive, but if he's really mean to a particular sheep, they will literally fall over on their side and just give up and die because they're just so sad that they've been mistreated. They're just very sensitive animals. Alex is laughing at that. It's true. They're very sensitive. And so a church has to know the same thing. A shepherd has to take care of and comfort his sheep, his flock, and understand that his job is not to mistreat them or to speak meanly to them, but to comfort them and bring them back to the fold. Gosh, I don't even have to work to bring those parallels to you. I know you can see them easily. Another thing that we see in these verses, in verses 2 to 3, is that just the leaders in the church, and these are leaders everywhere, this one really applies everywhere, have to lead with the right attitude. Verses 2 and 3 say, "Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock." And so that's, he's saying, if you are called to lead in any aspect, do it willingly. Don't do it because you just feel like you're being made to do that. Not because you're trying to make money from it, not because you want to be the boss. And goodness gracious, if you're leading because you like being the boss, you don't need to be leading. Appropriate leaders are servants, and that's what a shepherd would be. Again, I want to quote Stephen Cole. He said this, and I loved his definition of leadership, no matter where it is. He said, "Leadership, whether in the church, the home, or the government, means that you're the one whom God holds accountable for the direction of things under your care. If that thought doesn't cause you to break out in cold sweat, then you've got the wrong ideas about leadership." And I think that's true whatever you're leading. When you step into the role of leadership, God calls you to account for those that you're leading. And you're responsible for how you lead them and where they go with that leadership. That's sobering. And we need to take that seriously. And Peter says, but those who lead correctly, they're rewarded. Verse 4 says, "And when this chief shepherd comes," and that's in capital letters because that's Jesus, "you will receive the unfading crown of glories." Yes, there is a reward for those that lead correctly, but I think the most important part of this verse is that we look to the chief shepherd. I mean, he's called the chief shepherd. Even while he's talking to us as shepherds, he says, you look to the chief shepherd. And I think we miss the fact that Peter's really saying, there's your example. Lead like he did, sacrificially, with a servant's heart, and with entirely with love. That's how our chief shepherd, he is the good shepherd. He calls himself that. In John 10:11, and then also in 10:27 through 28, Jesus said this, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand." So the shepherds of the church, the shepherds in your home, whatever, but in particular, if you're looking for a healthy church, they need to be emulating the chief shepherd. Luke said in Acts chapter 20, verse 28, "Pay careful attention to yourselves and to all the flock in which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to care for the church of God, which he obtained with his own blood." And then finally, the last thing, and this really goes with all of us, and I think it's true, that's why Peter kind of puts this as an addendum after leadership. He talks about humility. Humility is central to a prescription for a healthy church, for a healthy home, for a healthy life. Verses 5 through 7 say, "Likewise, you who are younger, be subject to your elders. Clothe yourselves, all of you." Now he's not just talking to the younger right there. He's saying, all of you, clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, for God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him, because he cares for you. I found this article one time from the Star Tribune, and it's so encapsulated our idea, the world's idea of that's antithetical to humility, that I just want to read a little section of it to you, because this is what the world sees, and this is how they say we're to behave, and they see this as the appropriate behavior, and it is completely antithetical to what Bible tells us. So this article says, "There are some who naively cling to the nostalgic memory of God. The average churchgoer takes a few hours out of the week to experience the sacred, but the rest of the time, he is immersed in a society that no longer acknowledges God as an omniscient and omnipotent force to be loved and worshiped. Today, we are too sophisticated for God. We can stand on our own. We are prepared and ready to choose and define our own existence." Now, that's the saddest thing I've ever read, but it is a great encapsulation of the way the world sees themselves, that they've outgrown God. That whole idea of humility in the face of God is an outgrown concept, that we have to stand on our own. I mean, look at our country. It's founded on, don't tread on me. And that whole saying is that don't take advantage of me. I can take care of myself. It is everything we do and that we stand for, as I said, is antithetical to the world. And Peter is saying, you be humble. Clothe yourselves in humility. When we see ourselves as less than, it's not about being a doormat. And that's what the world would say. That you and I are saying, just trounce all over me, I'll just do whatever you ask me to do. I've used this example before, but there's Alexander the Great's horse. He had this huge black horse, huge big horse. It was like the biggest one. Of course, he would want the biggest one. And this horse was known as meek, gentle, and humble. Now, that horse would trounce all over anybody. I mean, it was huge and it was fierce. I mean, he probably killed more people than Alexander the Great did during battle. But they called him that because he was completely subject to Alexander the Great. He was a strong horse. Nobody got in that horse's way, but he was subject to Alexander the Great. This is what God says for us. He says, be strong. Be strong in me. Be subject to me. I'm not telling you to lay down and have people walk all over you. I am telling you to put yourself under them in terms of importance. Do for them what you would always want done for you, golden rule, but do for them in abject humility. And if we treat one another, especially when the body of believers that way, there is so much to be said for a healthy church body. Me as a believer, you as a believer, we will have that healthy perspective, not only on the church we go to, but in the church that we interact with. If I was on a ship and the ship started running aground somewhere, I wouldn't run up to the captain and knock him out of the way and tell him, let me steer the ship, because I felt like I'd be the one that could fix it. I would obviously want the captain to do that. There's a point at which we understand our role and understand what we're to subject ourselves to, and ultimately that is to God. F.B. Meyer said this: treat the anxieties you have that may cause you not to be humble, treat those cares as you treat sins. Hand them over to Jesus one by one as they occur, and then you remain humble to the Father. This is a healthy church. And again, so much of what Peter is speaking here is speaking to the leaders in your church, but it's speaking to you as well. It is a good prescription for how we can identify a healthy church, but it's a great prescription on how we can be a healthy church. Amen? These are practical things, but sometimes not as easy to walk out. I'll pray for you as you move through them. Next week's our last week. Make sure you download those PDFs if you haven't done so. Talk to you later. Thank you for joining me today on this episode of Get Real with Deb Waterbury. I hope you were blessed, and I hope you got some information that's going to help you get through your day. If you want any more information on any of my books or my articles or on any of my future speaking engagements, you can find all that information at debwaterbury.com. God bless you.